So we have talked about tree tracking, which takes place on the surface of the insulator. There is a second electrochemical process which also takes a very long time to develop in the terms of years, I mean from some hours to years, depending upon the stresses and the condition. And this is very similar to tracking. It is called treeing or electrical tree. In this case too, you have erosion channels formed in the volume of the dielectric. So in the difference between tracking and treeing is this, that tracking takes place on the surface of the insulator and treeing takes place inside in the volume of the dielectric. So if you could have seen inside, actually in this sample there is a tree, but it is not visible here. I will show you photographs of it. Tree is visible here. I have incorporated a needle and there is a gap. There is a very small needle gap here. You will not be able to see it, but inside the volume of the dielectric, there are formation of erosion channels. That means channels are creating in the region of high electric stress, and along these channels, along the volume of the channel, the dielectric material has been eroded. So it is now filled with gas or some air. Now these erosion channels are again zigzag and branched in nature, and they take the shape of a tree in nature, a natural tree, a bush, a tree, and therefore it is called electric tree. How do these trees develop? Now, whenever inside the dielectric you have local field enhancement, there are many reasons by which local field enhancements can happen. For example, you can have a bubble trapped inside the material. So there is bubble and there is air inside that material. Now that air is going to be stressed much more than the surrounding dielectric. And I will discuss later why that happens. It will be also less able to withstand the breakdown strength because it has got gas or air inside it rather than the dielectric material with higher breakdown strength. So that void breaks down. And that can be a process by which tree initiates. So that can be an initiating process. There might be embedded metal particles, or for any reason if there are protrusions on the high voltage conductor. So any kind of process by which there is local field enhancement, there is always a possibility that tree can initiate. Now once tree initiate, what happens is the tree continues to progress step by step. So a little bit of tree is added one at a time, and these are all zigzag in nature branch structures. And inside these channels, as erosion happens, partial discharge activity takes place. We've talked about corona and PD. We will further discuss treeing through PD later, but let us just understand that these channels become discharging. So there are discharges happening inside these channels, maybe not even the entire section, but a small section of the channel, there are discharges. And these discharges cause further degradation to the dielectric material around it, and the tree continues to propagate. The exact process by which a PD leads to tree formation, we will discuss later when we discuss partial discharges in detail. Right now, it should suffice to understand that treeing is a process by which erosion channels are formed inside the volume of the dielectric because of local field enhancements. And this combination of channels take the shape of a tree, and therefore it is called an electric tree. Remember, the tree takes a very long time to develop. So if you keep on monitoring the trees from time to time, you will see that the trees continue to progress. So steps keep on being added time to time. And ultimately what might happen is there might be a tree which over a long period of time can bridge the entire gap between the high voltage and the low voltage electrode. First, very fine filamentary channels are formed, and ultimately these channels may become thicker and may give rise to puncture. So this could be, treeing is important because treeing will always be there. I mean, if you take out any insulation which has been in service for some time, you will be able to observe trees under the microscope. That's not generally a problem. But over a period of time, these trees can develop, can progress further and further, and may cause catastrophic failure. So they extend by stepwise propagation and can ultimately bridge the electrodes and cause catastrophic failure. So this is the principal difference between treeing and tracking. Tracking takes place on the surface. Treeing takes place inside the volume of the dielectric. Tracking is caused by volatilization as well as carbon formation, whereas treeing only requires erosion. Carbon may or may not be carbon deposition may or may not happen, especially in case of polymeric insulation. Now we are increasingly looking at polymeric materials as replacement for many other kinds of solid materials that we had been used earlier. And polymeric insulators have many advantages, but one of the disadvantages that treeing is one of the principal roots of material failure in polymeric insulation. As I have already mentioned, tree initiation is generally some kind of local field enhancement. This could be protrusions or metallic inclusions or voids. Now, trees don't generally have one particular shape. They can acquire various shapes, and all these various shapes, we see them mirrored in nature. And depending upon the kind of tree that these electrical trees resemble, we call them tree-like trees, bushy trees, bush branch trees. As you can imagine, okay, I'll come to that in the next slide. Trees grow to acquire various shapes. And why are we bothered about the shape of the trees? Because the nature of tree progression will decide whether failure is likely. Not all trees are almost inevitable, but not all trees are dangerous. If you look at this, this is, okay, not the next slide, here itself. This is a tree-like tree, where you can see that the tree starts propagating from the high voltage electrode, and there are several branches which are growing in all directions. The branches also have are further branch, and each of the branches are again further branch, which is why we sometimes say that trees in nature have a fractal structure where the same structure is repeating across scales. So for example, if you look at a fern, the fern looks the same. It has a particular structure, and when you take out one leaf from the fern, it also seems to have a lot of small leaves. So when you see the repetition of the same kind of design or pattern, no matter how further you zoom in, at different scales, it's called a fractal structure, and electrical trees seem to have a fractal structure just as trees in nature have. Okay, so this is really like a bush branch tree. This is probably more like a tree-like tree because this seems to have less branches, and the tree seems to be, there are some branches which cannot be seen very well. I will quickly show you some better trees in the next slides. Here what you see, this is a bushy tree. Here the tree branches have progressed in such a manner that all the branches are kind of clustered together just in the vicinity of the high voltage electrode. Here, this is a tree-like tree where there are small flimsy branches, but there is a considerable propagation which is towards the other electrode. So it is like a tree which is growing high with some branches. And this bush branch tree is somewhere in between a tree-like tree and a bushy tree. You have branches. It is propagating in the towards the opposite electrode, but each of these bushes, each of these branches, there are several branches, not just a single branch. So here there is one small branch which has stopped propagating, but this branch has continued to propagate, one main branch. Here you don't see one main branch, you see several branches, and each of these branches are kind of branched again, branch further, whereas you don't see any branches here. These are several filamentary channels which are kind of bundled together. As you can imagine, this is probably going to be more dangerous because this has a higher likelihood of bridging the electrode gap. So we are interested in the nature of tree progression. As I say, the tree progression takes place by the repeat of some kind of damage producing mechanism. So maybe there is PD activity taking place inside the channel, and that is causing damage to the insulation, and every time some sufficient quantity of damage has been created, one more tree branch is visible, and this takes place by step-by-step extension of the electric tree. If you look at these pictures, you see these branches are there, and we have taken a photograph, and then we have waited for some time and taken a photograph sometime later. The original trees are there, the original tree branches are there, but all of them have extended further and further and become longer and longer. So the same tree branches keep on progressing step by the repeated damage mechanism towards the other extension. Here you can see some beautiful trees. These have been grown in our laboratory, in the high voltage laboratory in IIT Kanpur. Here you see, firstly, you see that there are some, this is a bushy structure. These are highly magnified images. You see these tree structures, and each of these tree branches, there are several branches, 1, 2, 3. Each of these branches are further branched. Again, these sub branches are again further branched, and maybe there are more branches which are not very well visible because it's a 3D tree. You are not being able to see the entire structure of the tree. So as you can see, this looks like a tree in nature, and there are branches, and branches have branches, and branches have further branches. So this is a structure. But you can already see that one of the tree channels seem to be propagating towards the other electrode. This is a needle plane electrode. Here you can see this is a similar tree like this, and in fact this is a tree which has been taken. These are the same trees, except that this tree picture has been taken at a much later time than this. And as you see, this tree has continued to propagate and has reached very close to the other electrode. Not only that, you can see, you can make out from these tree structures that the channels have become much more thicker. And carbonization has also happened. So something else is going on. These tree branches have been left alone. They have remained filamentary. It's not a problem. But something is going on in this tree. So possibly more discharges, more damage seems to be happening. We will study this in greater detail when we study PD. But as you can see, these channels seem to have almost reached the other electrode, and the channels which has reached the other electrode seem to be becoming blacker and blacker, which means more activity, more damage seems to be happening there. On the other hand, if you look at this particular tree, this is a tree which is full of, it has almost occupied the entire space. So it is not growing in the axial direction. This is growing in the axial direction. This has grown in the axial direction. This is not growing in the axial direction. This is a perfect example of a bush branch tree where there are several branches, and these several branches are giving rise to more and more branches, and it seems from this region where it has reached the other electrode, there is a lot of bushy branches developing, because these bleary regions are probably tree channels towards the back. So what seems to be happening is that the tree progression is slower, but the tree progression is more thorough. It seems to be occupying the entire space. The damage is more spread. It is occupying almost all space, but these are all small branches. They have not developed into large branches. And if you see the very large number of tree structures here, this tree is extensive. There are minute branches all over the place. So which means that by the time that this tree has developed, this tree has reached much further towards the other electrode. This tree has not reached that much, but it has caused more extensive damage. And so we would like to see whether this is going to more likely to cause catastrophic failure, or this is more likely to cause catastrophic failure. And if we can figure that out, we can probably take some steps. One thing is, when we see a tree, if we decide that this tree is likely to cause failure very soon, before actually catastrophic failure occurs, we can do some maintenance. Or if these are two different materials, we can try to work with this material which has some tree retarding properties, or we can try and develop some tree retarding properties. Anyway, those things we will talk about later. But the point is that treeing and tracking are two principal mechanisms which causes breakdown, which can cause catastrophic failure of solid breakdown over a very long period of time. These are electrochemical processes. The stresses are electrical in nature, and the damage is either mechanical or chemical in nature. Chemical reactions take place. So before we finish, let us look at some commercial solid dielectrics which are commonly in use. You have mica, you have quartz, you have ceramics or high-grade porcelain, you have organic materials like capacitor paper, ebonites, polyethylene, acrylic resins. Nowadays, more and more we are using polymeric insulators.